Some secrets don't stay buried. They wait patiently for the perfect moment to come home. That thought crossed my mind the night everything began to unravel inside the Harrison estate. The old dining room glowed beneath crystal chandeliers that had hung there longer than most of the people seated beneath them. The massive oak table stretched nearly 20 feet from end to end, polished so carefully that the candlelight shimmered across its surface like liquid gold. Harrison sat alone at the far end, silent as always, his weathered face unreadable beneath a mess of silver hair. Isabel poured wine with practiced elegance beside David, who looked exhausted despite wearing a tailored dark suit. Ethan remained near the grand staircase instead of taking his seat, watching everyone with the restless curiosity that had begun to worry me over the past few months. Across from me, Victoria carried herself with the same cold confidence she had possessed for decades. Even James, our loyal house manager, seemed unusually tense that evening. I remember reaching for my glass when I noticed something strange. James was carrying a stack of old correspondence toward Thomas Whitmore, our family attorney. It should have been an ordinary task. Yet as he crossed the room, one yellowed envelope slipped free and landed softly on the hardwood floor. No one else seemed to notice. I did. The envelope stopped near my chair. A faded name was written across the front in elegant handwriting. For a moment, I forgot how to breathe. Margaret Reed. The room suddenly felt smaller. The voices around me became distant, muffled beneath the pounding of my own heartbeat. I had not seen that name in over 40 years. Not since the summer everyone agreed never to speak about again. I looked up immediately, expecting someone else to react. No one did. Isabel continued speaking about family investments. David stared into his wine glass. Harrison remained motionless. Ethan was watching an argument unfold between Victoria and Thomas near the staircase. It was as though the name existed only for me. James quickly retrieved the envelope and placed it back into the stack, but the damage had already been done. Memories I had spent decades burying began pushing their way back to the surface. Questions I never wanted answered returned with them. Why was that name here? Who had brought that letter into this house? And after all these years, why now? As the conversation continued around me, I realized something that sent a chill through my entire body. The past I thought had disappeared forever had just knocked on the front door of the Harrison family. I barely touched my dinner that night. The voices around the table continued as if nothing had happened, yet every word felt distant. Margaret Reed. The name followed me long after the meal ended. Later, after the house had settled into its usual silence, I sat alone in the small sitting room beside the East Wing library. Rain tapped softly against the tall windows while the grandfather clock marked each passing minute. I had spent 40 years convincing myself that certain chapters of life were finished. Some memories become easier to carry when you pretend they belong to someone else. Yet the moment I saw that envelope, the walls I had built around those memories began to crack. I remembered the summer of 1984 more clearly than I wanted to. Harrison Estate had looked different then. The gardens were fuller. The family was smaller. David was still a child, chasing fireflies across the lawn. Harrison spent most evenings on the veranda with a glass of iced tea while discussing business plans that seemed impossibly ambitious at the time. And Margaret Reed had been part of that world. She was not family, at least not officially. But she appeared often enough that everyone knew her name. Intelligent, confident, and somehow connected to matters nobody ever fully explained. Then one day she was simply gone. No farewell, no announcement, no funeral, just silence. Whenever questions surfaced, someone always found a way to change the subject. Over time, people stopped asking, or perhaps they learned they were not supposed to ask. The next morning, I found Ethan standing alone near the staircase, staring at one of the old family portraits. He seemed distracted, thoughtful. When he noticed me, he offered a faint smile. "Grandma, have you ever felt like everyone in this family knows something except you?" he asked. The question caught me off guard. "Why would you ask that?" I said carefully. Ethan shrugged. "Because lately I keep finding little things that do not add up." Before I could press further, Isabel entered the hall and the conversation ended. Yet Ethan's words lingered. That afternoon, I walked past Thomas Whitmore's study and noticed the same stack of correspondence resting on his desk. The yellowed envelope was gone. I told myself to keep walking. Instead, I stopped at the doorway. For the first time in decades, I allowed myself to wonder whether Margaret Reed had truly disappeared at all. And deep inside, a feeling I could not explain told me that someone in this house was terrified of that question. I began paying closer attention after that conversation with Ethan. Small details that once seemed harmless suddenly felt significant. The Harrison estate had always been filled with routines. Breakfast appeared at the same hour. Financial reports arrived every Friday. Family dinners followed an unspoken schedule that nobody questioned. Yet once suspicion enters a house, even ordinary things begin to look different. 2 days later, I noticed Ethan carrying a dusty frame down from the third-floor storage rooms. The old portrait was larger than he was, and he nearly lost his grip while maneuvering it through the hallway. I offered to help, but he shook his head with an excited smile. "You need to see this first," he said. He carried the frame into the library and carefully set it against a leather armchair. At first glance, it appeared to be another Harrison family portrait from decades ago. We had dozens of them throughout the estate. Men in dark suits, women in elegant dresses, generations frozen in oil paint. But this one was different. The canvas had partially separated from the backing. When Ethan gently lifted it, something hidden behind the portrait slipped loose and fell onto the rug. It was a photograph, an actual photograph, not a painting. The edges had yellowed with age. My hands trembled slightly as Ethan picked it up. Neither of us spoke for several seconds. 3 people stood in the picture. Harrison, decades younger. A woman I recognized immediately, Margaret Reed. And between them stood a young boy, perhaps 6 or 7 years old. His smile was familiar. His eyes were familiar. Everything about him felt familiar. Ethan stared at the image. Then he looked toward a framed photograph of David sitting on the bookshelf across the room. The resemblance was impossible to ignore. "Do you see it too?" he asked quietly. I did not answer right away. My mind was already racing through memories I had spent years trying to forget. Before I could gather my thoughts, footsteps echoed in the hallway. Someone was approaching. Ethan quickly slipped the photograph inside a book resting on the nearby table. Moments later, Isabel appeared in the doorway. Her expression remained calm, but her eyes moved carefully between us. "What are you two doing in here?" she asked. Ethan answered casually, but something changed in the room. A tension settled over us. Isabel lingered longer than necessary before finally leaving. Once she was gone, Ethan removed the photograph again. This time neither of us spoke, because we both understood the same thing. Somebody had hidden that picture for a reason, and somebody inside this house never wanted it to be found. That evening I could not stop thinking about the photograph. I carried the memory of it through every room of the estate. The resemblance between the young boy and David was too striking to dismiss as coincidence. Yet what troubled me most was not the photograph itself. It was the realization that someone had hidden it behind a family portrait where nobody was ever meant to find it. The following afternoon, I decided to visit the West Wing archives. Most members of the family avoided that part of the house. Decades of documents, property records, correspondence, and financial files filled floor-to-ceiling shelves that smelled faintly of dust and aging paper. Thomas Whitmore often worked there when reviewing estate matters, but on that day the room stood empty. Sunlight filtered through tall windows, casting long shadows across the hardwood floor. I moved slowly through the aisles, searching, without fully knowing what I hoped to find. After nearly an hour, a familiar name caught my attention. Reed. My pulse quickened. The file was thin, almost suspiciously thin. Inside were only a handful of records. A property transfer, several legal notices, and a trust document established more than 40 years earlier. I read the page twice before I understood what I was seeing. A substantial trust fund had been created under strict confidentiality. The beneficiary's identity had been sealed. The account remained active to this day. I stared at the date. The trust had been established only weeks after Margaret disappeared from our lives. Before I could examine the remaining pages, footsteps echoed from the hallway. Instinctively, I closed the folder. Moments later, Sophia Bennett entered the archives carrying a stack of legal binders. She seemed surprised to find me there. "Mrs. Harrison," she said with a polite smile. I did not realize anyone was using this room today. There was something reassuring about Sophia. Unlike many people around the estate, she rarely appeared interested in family politics. As we spoke, her attention drifted briefly toward the folder in my hands. A flicker of recognition crossed her face before disappearing. "Is something wrong?" I asked. She hesitated. "I am not sure," she replied carefully. But lately I have found several records that do not match older filings. Small discrepancies, dates that changed, signatures that appear in one document but vanish in another. The room suddenly felt colder. Sophia lowered her voice. It is almost as if someone spent years rewriting parts of the family's history. Neither of us spoke for several seconds. Then my eyes drifted back toward the trust file resting on the table. For the first time, I began to wonder whether Margaret Reed had not simply been erased from the family. Perhaps someone had spent decades making sure the truth could never be found. For the next several days, an uneasy silence settled over the estate. Nobody mentioned Margaret Reed. Nobody mentioned the hidden photograph. Yet I could feel the tension growing beneath the surface like a storm gathering beyond the horizon. Ethan became increasingly determined to uncover answers. He spent hours moving between the library, the archives, and the older sections of the house that most people rarely visited. One rainy afternoon, he appeared at my door carrying a ring of tarnished keys. "James gave me these," he said quietly. That alone was enough to surprise me. James had served the Harrison family for decades. Loyalty was woven into every part of his character. He was not a man who shared family matters lightly. "Why would he do that?" I asked. Ethan hesitated. "Because he thinks it is time." Those words stayed with me as we crossed the estate together. The keys led us toward an unused corridor in the oldest wing of the house. The wallpaper had faded with age, and the air smelled faintly of cedar and dust. At the very end of the hallway stood a narrow wooden door I had not opened in years. Ethan tried 3 different keys before the lock finally clicked. The room beyond was smaller than I remembered. Covered furniture sat beneath white sheets. Old trunks lined the walls. Dust floated through beams of afternoon sunlight. It looked untouched by time. We searched quietly for nearly 30 minutes. Most of what we found seemed ordinary. Account books, family correspondence, boxes of photographs. Then Ethan opened a locked cedar chest tucked beneath a window. Inside were dozens of carefully organized files. Many carried names I recognized. Some belonged to family members long gone. One folder immediately caught my attention. Read. My hands felt cold as I opened it. The contents were unlike anything we had found before. Letters, legal records, property agreements, and copies of documents that should have existed in the archives but did not. As I turned each page, a troubling pattern emerged. Dates had been altered. References had been removed. Entire sections appeared to have been rewritten. Someone had systematically created a second version of history, a version designed to be seen by the family. Ethan stared at the files in disbelief. "This was deliberate," he said. Before I could respond, a voice came from the doorway behind us. We turned and found James standing there. His expression was heavy with exhaustion. For a long moment, he simply looked at the documents spread across the table. Then he spoke softly. "There are things about this family that should have come to light years ago." His eyes settled on the Reed folder. "And if you keep reading, you will discover that Margaret Reed was never the person everyone was told she was." James closed the door behind him and stepped into the room with the slow, careful movements of a man carrying a burden he had held for far too long. The afternoon light stretched across the floorboards while silence settled between us. Ethan remained standing beside the cedar chest, waiting. I could see questions written across his face. James looked older than I had ever seen him. "Margaret Reed was not an outsider," he said quietly. "That is the first lie everyone was told." My heart sank. For decades, I had accepted the story that Margaret was simply a woman who drifted briefly through the Harrison family's orbit before disappearing. James shook his head. "She was connected to this family long before most people realized it." He reached into the folder and carefully removed a document. The paper had yellowed with age, but the signatures remained clear. Ethan leaned forward. I did the same. The document revealed that Margaret had once owned a significant share of property connected to the Harrison estate. Not rented, not borrowed, owned. "That cannot be right," I whispered. James nodded sadly. "It is right. The records were hidden, but they were never destroyed." For the next hour, we examined file after file. The deeper we looked, the stranger the story became. Margaret's name appeared repeatedly beside transactions, legal agreements, and family decisions. Yet every official version of Harrison family history excluded her completely. It was as though someone had carefully removed her from every public record while preserving a second set of documents in secret. Ethan finally broke the silence. Why would anyone go to this much trouble? James looked toward the window before answering. Because some truths are expensive. The words lingered in the room. Then he revealed something that changed everything. Several years after Margaret supposedly vanished, annual payments had continued to leave a private trust account. The payments were substantial, regular, consistent. Someone had been supporting her all along. My pulse quickened. You are saying she never disappeared? James met my eyes. I am saying she remained very much alive. The room felt suddenly smaller. Every assumption I had carried for 40 years began falling apart. If Margaret was alive, then the story everyone believed was false. If the trust continued operating, then someone inside the family knew exactly where she was. Ethan slowly closed one of the folders and stared at the table. Then somebody has been lying to us for decades. No one disagreed. Because for the first time, we were no longer searching for a forgotten woman. We were searching for the person who had spent 40 years making sure nobody ever found her. The discovery changed the atmosphere inside the estate. Every conversation seemed layered with hidden meaning. Every glance felt calculated. Over the next week, Ethan became obsessed with tracing the trust account records. Sophia quietly helped whenever she could, reviewing documents after hours and comparing them against public filings. What they found only deepened the mystery. The payments connected to Margaret had continued through multiple administrations of the family estate. Different signatures appeared over the years, but one name surfaced again and again in correspondence linked to authorizations and private instructions. Harrison. At first, Ethan believed it proved Harrison had orchestrated everything. The conclusion seemed obvious. Harrison was the head of the family. Harrison controlled the finances. Harrison had the influence to keep secrets hidden. Yet the more records we examined, the less certain that theory became. One evening, Sophia arrived carrying a weathered leather binder she had discovered among retired legal archives. Inside were letters written decades earlier. Most were routine business communications. One was different. The letter had been written by Harrison himself. As I read it, my hands began to shake. The tone was not controlling or manipulative. It was desperate. Harrison was pleading for information. He was asking where Margaret had gone. He was demanding explanations from people whose names had long since disappeared from the family record. The date stunned me. The letter had been written months after Margaret supposedly left. Ethan stared at the page in silence. If he wrote this, he finally said, then he did not know where she was. Sophia nodded slowly. Which means someone else was managing the story. For years I had accepted certain assumptions about Harrison. Many of us had. He was distant, reserved, difficult to read. It had always been easy to imagine him as the architect behind every family secret. But the documents painted a different picture. Harrison had not been hiding Margaret. He had been searching for her. The realization forced us to reconsider everything. If Harrison was not the one controlling the narrative, then who had benefited from Margaret's disappearance? Later that night, I found Harrison sitting alone in the library. The fire crackled softly in the stone fireplace while shadows danced across the shelves. He looked tired, older than I had ever seen him. For a long moment, neither of us spoke. Then he looked up and quietly asked a question that stopped me cold. Has someone finally found her? Harrison's question echoed in my mind long after I left the library. He had not asked whether we were investigating old records. He had not asked whether we had uncovered family secrets. He had asked one thing and one thing only. Had someone finally found her? The next morning, Ethan arrived at breakfast carrying a folded sheet of paper. His expression told me everything before he spoke. Sophia had traced the most recent activity connected to the trust account. For decades, the payments had passed quietly through layers of legal administration, but one transfer stood out. It had been processed only 3 months earlier. More importantly, it had been directed toward a small coastal town nearly 600 miles away. Nobody at the table noticed the look that passed between Ethan and me. Isabel discussed investment reports. David stared at his coffee. Victoria remained composed as always. Yet, for the first time, I felt certain that the answers we sought were no longer buried in old files. They were waiting somewhere beyond the estate. 2 days later, Ethan, Sophia, and I made the trip. The town was quiet, the kind of place where people still greeted strangers on Main Street. Following the paper trail led us to a modest white house overlooking the water. Nothing about it suggested wealth or family influence. It looked peaceful, ordinary. We sat in the car for several minutes, gathering the courage to walk to the front door. When it finally opened, my breath caught in my throat. An elderly woman stood there. Her silver hair moved gently in the ocean breeze. Time had changed her face, but not enough. I recognized her instantly. Margaret. For a long moment, nobody spoke. Her eyes moved from Ethan to Sophia before settling on me. A strange sadness filled her expression, as though she had expected this moment for many years. "It took longer than I thought," she said softly. The sound of her voice sent a chill through me. She stepped aside and invited us in. The house contained photographs, books, and small reminders of a quiet life built far away from the Harrison family. Then I noticed something resting on a side table. A framed photograph. Harrison, much younger, smiling beside Margaret. Not hidden, not forgotten, displayed openly. Ethan saw it too. Margaret followed our gaze and closed her eyes briefly. "You deserve the truth," she said. "But before I tell you what happened, you need to understand one thing. The person who removed me from the Harrison family was not Harrison." Margaret sat quietly beside the window while the afternoon sunlight reflected across the water outside. For years I had imagined this moment differently. I thought finding her would answer every question. Instead, it opened even more. She folded her hands and looked directly at me. "The truth is simpler than people think," she said. "But it is also far more painful." Ethan leaned forward while Sophia listened without speaking. Margaret explained that decades ago she had become involved in several charitable projects connected to the Harrison estate. Over time, she earned the trust of many people, including Harrison. Together, they planned community investments and educational programs that would have changed the future of several small towns. Yet not everyone welcomed her influence. Certain members of the family believed she threatened established power structures. Rumors began spreading. Meetings happened without her knowledge. Documents were altered. Opportunities disappeared. Eventually, she was presented with a choice: leave quietly or become the center of a public family conflict that would damage everyone involved. "I thought I was protecting the people I cared about," she said softly. "So I left." My chest tightened. "Who convinced you to go?" I asked. Margaret looked down at the photograph resting beside her chair. For several seconds, she said nothing. Then she answered, "Victoria." The room fell silent. Every discovery of the past few weeks suddenly aligned into a single clear picture. The altered records, the missing files, the rewritten history, the hidden trust. Victoria had not removed Margaret through force or scandal. She had done it through influence, patience, and decades of carefully maintained silence. When we returned to the Harrison estate, the family gathered once more in the massive dining room beneath the chandeliers. Nothing looked different, yet everything had changed. Thomas Whitmore stood at the head of the table, holding a sealed folder. Inside was a collection of original records recovered from Margaret's archives. One by one, the documents confirmed every part of her story. Nobody argued. Nobody could. Across the table, Harrison remained silent. His eyes never left the papers. Victoria sat perfectly still, but for the first time in my life, I saw uncertainty on her face. As the evening ended, Harrison rose from his chair and looked around the room. "A family cannot survive on lies forever," he said quietly. No one responded. They did not need to. The truth had finally returned home. The secrets were no longer buried. And as I looked around the table, I realized the greatest inheritance any family can leave behind is not wealth, property, or influence. It is the courage to face the truth before it disappears for another generation.